stuck in a snowbank, what am I going to do? And the three guys that were sitting there said, what kind of a cow? And I said, a Volkswagen. He said, oh boys, come on. Picked it up and took it out of the snowbank and put me on the way. But, you know, it was gorgeous, marvelous, all ice and icicles. It was like a fairyland. But if you went off the road, the fairy goes away. I will tell you that. So that was one of the things that happened in those times. But the town itself, you know, we had the library. Mr. Abercrombie was a librarian too. And it was his job, he figured, to censor what you read. And if you didn't like what you read, he kept the book underneath the desk, and you might not get it, and very much so might not get it. But he was pretty terrific for all of the things that he did. And I remember going down in the winters and the cold nights to pick him up and take him up the road to the miner house. And of course, one of the miners had been killed on Route 23. It was one of the miner's brothers. And the other one was still, they had the Center Town store, the general store was their responsibility. And Mr. Miner kept the store going for, you know, a number of years. And then it was taken over by the, I'm not sure of the sequence of this, but the Center of the Light in New Marlborough was trying to make a restaurant out of it. And they tried that, and you could see that they, you know, had candlelit tables and so forth. But it didn't work out for them. And then Mickey and George Jervis bought it. And that was a terrible winter. It was one of the coldest winters. And many of the cans on the shelves in this, the place was not insulated, it was uninsulated. And some of the cans burst, and so the place was like sort of a wreck. And they ultimately lost the Center of Town store. But they, of course, stayed in Monterey, and they had Scott and Troy and Tammy, and, you know, and Nikki is still here with us right now, so that's really great. Mm-hmm. But after the Jervises lost it, I think the next people that bought it were the Phoenixes, Mr. and Mrs. Phoenix. And they kept the store going for quite some time. And at one time, when one of my daughters, my third daughter, Adrian, had a little hot dog stand at Green Park. And it was there, you know, for one summer anyway, you know, which was great. And one nice man who was running what is now the roadside store would let her use the refrigerator in the little Grange at that time. So we had that. And of course the Grange, the Grange was sold to the town ultimately for $1, you know, and turned out quite well. But during the years when I was at the Monterey school, every Christmas we would give a Christmas play. We did Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer with a curtain with a hole in it and a flashlight with a red light in it, you know, for the thing. And we had all kinds of things. We did a different kind of, we did Cinderella, we did all kinds of things at the Christmas part. And one of the people who was helpful on that one was Mary Thorne. And Mary Thorne, whose daughter Anna was in the Monterey school also. And the presents were given out, and my husband was Santa Claus a couple of times, you know, so it was really, you know, a family affair on my part, a family affair on the part of the people who lived in Monterey. But we did that for about 3 or 4 years until I left to go to Westfield. And I would not have ever been as involved in town activities if I hadn't gone to teach at the Central Town School. And I think that's a very important thing for the emotion for the kids to have this connection that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And I think that it happens years later, around in the late 70s, when a grant was offered by the federal government for teaching children in rural schools, and they were trying to get a teacher from every state, and they got 48 states, and a couple were repeated, and I was one of them that they had asked for. And at that time, Paul McDonald was the superintendent of schools, and he didn't think that they really wanted me, and they kept calling me, and they finally got a hold of him, and I finally got a hold of him and asked him to come to the school, and I convinced him to call them back and tell them that I could come. So when we went to the Rhode Island, as a matter of fact, was the sponsoring university at that time. And when we went there, there were two one-room schoolhouses. One was in Nantucket, and the other was Monterey. And that was pretty much it. There were no other one-room schoolhouses. Many of the people who came from the South came from nice brick schools, segregated, but nevertheless, the schools were supposed to be better than the one-room schoolhouses. But that wasn't true. I mean, one-room schoolhouses had a real close, family-oriented information or whatever, so that you could call the parents and say, guess what, Johnny had a so-and-so today, and you should know this, and so on. It was very, very important to me and to the kids. Scott Jenkins, am I right on that? Maybe, anyway. Jervis, no? Whatever. Scott, who just got off the board.
Jenkins,
yeah. That he was one of the kids. I remember when he was born and how my sister who was like a little older at that time, maybe 3 or 4 years old, was upset that she had a little brother, whatever. There are stories I could tell you about that too, but I won't. They were just great. But it was interesting. And Nantucket still had that one-room schoolhouse, I think, and may even now, whatever. But I stayed at Westfield for 3 years, but then decided that, I really needed to be home. So, and my mother wasn't getting any better, so that's what I did. But in the years when we had then I was there, we had the half-day kindergarten. I don't know whether everybody knew this or not, and I don't know how much I should be sharing, but anyway. But on the half-day kindergarten, I would go on the other half of the day to the New Marlboro School and was teaching reading to kids who were having problems in New Marlboro. And on the way, I would go by my house in Monterey. And my mother would be there, and I would have lunch with her, the traditional grilled cheese sandwich with tomato soup. And on the way, as I say, I'd have this and go on to the school. And that was something I could do every day. And it was good for my mother and good for me and whatever. But this is what happened on a half day.
Where did your girls go to school?
What?
Where did your girls go to school?
Where did the girls go to school?
Your girls, yeah.
The first girl who went to the Monterey School was Mary Ann, and she's my fourth daughter. And Gwen went there, and Adrian went there with a previous teacher. And then she went on to the Marlboro School. Suzanne was too old for the first and second grade, and she went to the Marlboro School. And Lynn the same way. So the only ones who went to the Monterey School was Mary Ann, fourth daughter, Gwen, fifth daughter, and my sixth daughter was when they went to the half-day kindergarten, and she was already too old for that. So they didn't all get to go to the one-room schoolhouse. But nevertheless, they had a very close very close to that, because we used to sit around and cut things out for the kindergartners to do, and, you know, whatever. They were all very helpful. So that's, ultimately, my husband also gave up salesmanship and was teaching in Lee. And so all of us would sit around the dining room table. He had his homework, I had my homework. There was no question that the girls just joined us and they did their homework. There was no question to sit down and do your homework. We were all there. Whatever, what can I say? So there were all of those wonderful things having to do with the Monterey school. And then when I came back from teaching at Wastefield State, I went back to teaching at New Marlboro and taught 2nd and 3rd grade, and 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, not all together, but separate ones, because there were 4 grades in New Marlboro, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And I taught there really until I retired. But we had a wonderful experience because of the close proximity of the teachers, the town, the parents. It worked out very well.
So you were pleased with New Marlboro schools?
Yes. It worked out pretty well. I know they've added a kindergarten to it now and so forth, and also a disabilities teaching group or
Right.
person.
So how do you feel about Monterey School, one-room schoolhouse being closed?
I think that it's a terrible mistake. I think that this is a rare opportunity to hold on to not just a historic monument, but to something that is emotionally very important. I mean, there aren't many kids who can say that I've been to a one-room school. And if you say that to somebody sitting next to you at the table, and I went to a one-room school, their eyebrows go up and they say, well, what was that like? It was internally important to have this closeness and to take advantage of it. As I say, we could walk to the library, you could walk back from the library, you could go see the sheep being sheared on occasion. You know, there were lots of things to go. At one time, the luncheon was served by the Center of Town School store. You know, they would take the luncheon up and do that. And so another time the luncheon came from the Southern Berkshire Center at Mount Everett, and they would send it over. So, but it was almost a material thing for the way the students would feel to be part of this and to grow up and be part of this. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think of the people who got to be select people and so forth, you know, really wonderful. And I would feel that it would be a terrible mistake to let go of that school. And they are certainly trying. When I finished teaching after about 26 years, and I was ready to retire, and I had lost my husband the year before, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. And it turned out that Jed Lipsky was one of the select people. Mm-hmm. And when he decided that he wasn't going to run, and I decided that perhaps I would run, 2 of the town fathers came and asked me if I would run for office on the select board. And I said if I did, then I would retire, and this is what I did. And I served for 9 years, 3 sessions. And I must tell you that the other night at the convention, when Meryl Streep spoke, she said that any time a woman is the first of anything, that we should be concerned. And yes, I was the first woman that ever served as a select person in Monterey. And quite proud of that, whatever. And as a matter of fact, when I think I was in my second or third select person selection, I stood up at the town meeting and said that you are all the Board of Selectmen, and I was asking that you not be the Board of Selectmen, because I would like to be a select woman, so could you just make it a select board and not have it be a select Board of Selectmen? And they did it, which was great. And then I was followed, of course, by Muriel. So that was great. As I say, the town was wonderful in many, many, many ways. And there were so many things that happened. I mean, and the fact that we have the Mark Maycook is the head of our library, and we have people who are caring. And I know that they're looking for people to fill in some of the slots, and I do hope they find them, and because this is a gem. Believe me, Monterey is one of those perfect places to raise children. When my children growing up, we had 8 acres. We had a big meadow in back, which I most of the time gave to Gould Farm to have their animals on. When they were all growing up, we had horses, and we had Gould Farm would also give us their passage, any kind of meadow and so forth, and we'd have different kinds of competition. And Pat Andrus had 2 or 3 horses that she boarded in our meadow also, and my kids all learned to ride horses, and we raised sheep, and we raised goats particularly. And the first goats that we raised were for overseas. There were toonie up and toonie down with the horses, and when we sent them overseas, we were afraid that they were voracious horses. They would eat anything. And we were afraid they'd eat a hole in the boat before they got there. But then we had kept on raising different kinds of animals, and the last goat that we had was Basil, and it was very intelligent, let me tell you, amazing. I come home one night and found him standing in the middle of the dining room table, having eaten all the plants, you know. But we all, they were all just great. Yeah. I hope I said that, but the goat was the one that stood on the dining room table. Good. Yeah. Yes. Whatever. and he used, at that time, my house was on Curtis Road, and then Gower House was on this Curtis Road. And Gower House was there for a long time until a family from the south who lived at Gould Farm lived in that Gower House, and they used a pesticide around the base of the house. And it turned out that when Virgil Stucker was here at Gould Farm, that he found out that even the federal government wasn't using that pesticide, and that they had used it at one of the airfields, and they had to close the airfield down because it was so toxic. So Gould Farm had to make a decision as to whether they would be able to rent the house to somebody with children, but of course that would be very risky. So they decided to take the house down, and it was no longer there. But during the time when it was there, and the woman who was in charge of it would call my husband and say, the goats are here and they're eating my roses. And so he would go and get the goats and bring them back. And before he had a chance to get the goats settled, they were back again eating her roses. It was terrible, whatever. But we did all the animals. We did the sheep, we did the horses, we did the goats, we did rabbits, and we did roosters who would be outside your window before 5 o'clock in the morning, cock-a-doodling doo. I couldn't wait till somebody ate them. Don't tell anybody. Whatever. So as I say, that's many of those things. Do you have anything that you want to know?
Yeah, I think that probably a couple of things. I was thinking that maybe when you talk about teaching school, some of the students that kind of stand out some of the students that stand out in your mind, that were pretty much characters, and it's okay because this is just going to sit in the library for right now with Mark and me.
Oh,
So
okay.
we won't censor you. And maybe a little bit more about what it was like being on the select board, you know, because we're going through some things now that are really kind of tough. But so the select board, the kids in school, and then if you can, kind of figure a way to talk a little bit about the Edith Wilson house and maybe the quilting. I'm interested in some of that, but you can pick which of those subjects seem interesting to you and fun to talk about. You're doing great. You're doing really great. So pick a topic. Which one?
Okay, some of the little vignettes of the teaching. As I say, because the school was small, because it was in the center of town, and because the kids that were going to the school, you know, all had 2 parents, which was really pretty wonderful. My first year of teaching, and believe me, I really had no experience teaching school. I worked in editing and publishing in New York, and this was a whole new thing for me. So I had no idea about teaching school. And my first year of teaching was really kind of amazing. So I actually spent 2 years with 2 years with one of the Hasted boys. One of my dream children, wonderful, red-headed, terrific kid who refused to learn anything. Absolutely, he was not going to learn anything. I used to take a rag doll and sit it on a chair and talk to it because he wouldn't talk to me and I'd talk to it, and then he would kind of get the message somehow or other, so forth. And this is a confession. I had never hit a child, but after about the middle of the second year, when this very, very bright little boy absolutely refused to do anything, I think I slapped him in the face. And I was horrified. Just couldn't. It's the only time I ever laid a hand on a child, almost. Anyway, the end of that day, I couldn't wait to call his mother and father before he got home and tell them that what I had done and how awful I felt and so forth. And of course, they did the thing at that time, is what parents said, and what did he do? You know, I'm sure he deserved it. You know, that was their response. Horrible. But anyway, we had a meeting, and Hasted, his wife, and I met. And there were 2 older boys, and the 2 older boys were typical, wonderful Nordic young men, big and strong and blonde and everything. And here's this slight, handsome little red-headed kid who took after his mother, whereas the boys took after their father. And it turned out that the boys and the father would go off hunting, or they'd go places together and they'd do things. And they never included Keith, ever. And he just felt like he was a non-entity. So I guess they realized that, and we realized that that was what the problem was. And they righted that wrong and included him and so forth. And I will say this, that many, many years later, when Keith became part of the security for the president and was part of the Army or the Marines, I'm not sure, I think the Army, and they came to my house. And when they were at my house, he brought a picture of himself, you know, on the detail for the president and everything. But he was sure that I didn't like him at that time, but I did. I loved him, as I loved them all. And I was very fortunate. We had many kids who were really terrific. And one of them was a little girl. At one time, she was the only girl in the whole school of little boys. And she, I think at one time I had something that made it so that I couldn't teach school for a week or so. I don't know whether I had whooping cough or what I had. I have no idea. Anyway, when I couldn't teach school, they got a substitute who was the wife, I think, of one of the sheriffs around. And little wonderful Cindy Hebert bit her on the leg and then ran home immediately, you know, whatever, escaped, as it were. And I also had calls from a couple of mothers, particularly one who said her son wasn't sleeping at night because the teacher was so mean, and so forth, with just, as I called the administration, it's just the wrong grade for her. She should just teach older children than little kids. And so they didn't have her teaching the lower grades anymore. But Cindy bit her. And everybody cheered, I think. What can I say? But there were, you know, as I say, that was the only time, except when one of the little boys who took over, this was still at the one-room schoolhouse. And in the one-room schoolhouse at one time, in that one-room schoolhouse, the bathrooms for the kids were icicles in the winter, absolute icicles. We couldn't do anything with them. And at one time, he was backing out of one of the stalls because he had locked the door, and he's backing out, and I happened to come in, and there's this round, wonderful rear end sticking right out at me. So I gave it a whack on the bottom, you know. But those are the only two times. But the second one was minor, but the first one was an emotional trauma for me, anyway, you know. This wonderful, bright little boy. So forgive me, whomever, whatever, what can I say? Yeah, right. So those were wonderful, wonderful times at that school. And as I say, I would never have been involved in Monterey and many of the Monterey things if it hadn't been for the actual participation in the lives of the kids and the parents and so forth. So, you know, it was pretty amazing. And it carried over to the Marlboro School when I moved there, did that too. So, as I say, I taught first and second in the Marlboro, and also the last year that I was there, I taught third. So, but we had wonderful kids and wonderful parents who were all very supportive, and I just loved all of them to do that. It was wonderful, all those things.
So, so we can go, do you feel like talking about the select board and what the sort of the sense of politics? Do you have any interest in talking about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's two things. First, this is, I got sent up from the.
Oh, that's me. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And then
I said,
There's
Okay.
another room down the hall that I don't know if it'll probably be quieter if you want that.
It's fine,
Okay.
it's fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much
Yeah.
for doing that. Okay,
If it
Thank
gets,
you.
If that gets too loud though, if you just go into the entryway, it's the first door on the left.
okay.
I'm
thank
sorry,
you
I
so
didn't
much.
realize that that's what you were here for.
Oh, don't worry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know more about Monterey history than you did before.
Yeah, no, it was interesting to listen to. I heard some of it, but not all.
So, yeah, so do you want to talk about the select board, or do you want to talk about Edith Wilson, or
No.
quilting, whatever, it's your pleasure.
Right.
Whatever you like to talk about, and
Right.
what you enjoy talking about.
I had been involved in municipal elected position because I was on the library trustees at one time,
Okay.
and it was run at that time. Now, if I could remember his name, I will give it to you later. He had the French restaurant on 123.
Fred Lancome.
Right. Fred Lankham was really in charge, and we really much did pretty much what he wanted done.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't run one other one, and I think Judy Hayes did in my place, so that was fine. And then I didn't hold another elected position until I ran for select board. And I did that in 1989. And I was not sure that I would get elected. You know, this was male-run town, and here I was the first woman, and we weren't at all sure. But the two guys that came and suggested that I run, so I did. I said if I didn't run, then I would retire. If I didn't, I would continue to teach. But it was a wonderful opportunity. And I considered the years that I was on the board not to be ones that were difficult. As a matter of fact, I was fortunate enough to run into Mr. Kavanaugh in Great Barrington at one time, picking up some object that would only fit in my old house. And would only fit in my own house. And he said, "Oh, I know who you are." And I said, "Oh." And he said, "They say you're doing an okay job." And I thought, well, that was the best approbation. It's like getting a medal. It's great. So I was very fortunate that I was elected 3 times, which was wonderful. And I served with some pretty wonderful people also. You know, Peter Brown, Stephan, Fred Chapman, you know, all those guys were just wonderful people to work with. And we reached a lot of compromises. The white lines in the road. Okay, you see the white lines in the road, and they are there because of a compromise where we had to make a decision. There were 3 of us on the board, and Peter Brown said, "We don't need white lines. You know, we're in a rural community," and so on. I said, "Yes, we need the white lines because on a foggy night you can't see a thing." So I was a yes, and he was a no. And then Stephan came on. He was on the board and came. We said, "It's up to you, Stephan." So Stephan went outside and looked around and came back in and said, "We need the white line." I win! Whatever. No, and yes, we have the white lines, and yes, on a foggy night, you're darn glad to see them there. There's no question about it. So we did that. And that's pretty much an easy thing. One of the most difficult things was, at one time, and still probably, the School of Education for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts wanted to combine the bigger schools and have all the regional schools work together. And it turned out that it was possible that we might join the Great Barrington school system. And we wanted to have a meeting. And our school committee did a wonderful job putting together a brochure to present to the meeting that we had with the Great Barrington Board. And let me change that, not the Great Barrington Board, the Sheffield Board of Selectmen. And when we had the meeting, we thought that we would present our brochure, and which they'd spent time on. This is the Monterey school board, just for Monterey. We had done all this and wanted to present a very workable situation. When we got to the meeting, we thought, well, we would present our brochure. And it turned out that whoever was in charge of whoever was in charge of the Great Barrington School looked at us, who were all there, and had our little brochures and ready to turn them over. At that time, Tom Consolati was the superintendent. And we were all waiting to see what the Great Barrington School Board was going to present. And he looked at us and he had a piece of paper in his hand, and he said, oh. And he turned around and went away and came back, and he had made copies of the pieces of paper. And we had really constructed a very nice brochure of the whys that it would be to our advantage in some ways, and maybe not in other ways, and so forth. And there were two young women in the audience, and one of them was Jennifer Brown, Mary Ellen's daughter, and I forget who the other one was. And they stood up and wanted to know what would happen to them if the Great Barrington people took over. They were going to graduate the next year. How would the graduation go? What would be left to them? And this man was absolutely rude to them. You know, these two young women who were strong enough to stand up in a very polite, absolutely parliamentary arrangement to speak. And he was absolutely awful to them. Afterwards, Tom Consolati wrote to them and told them how sorry he was that was what happened to them. But they turned us down absolutely. You know, they weren't even going to listen. These were the ones that Sheldon Fenn remembered, that didn't want the mucky boots from rural Monterey in their school system and so forth. And he said that they were really very rude to anybody who went from Monterey into the Great Barrington school system. And then, of course, prior to that, there was the 1945, 48, when the Southern Berkshire Regional School System was started. And that, of course, was one of the big people that worked on that, of course, was Dick Tryon. And got that working in, and they did very well. But there came a time when they wanted to close the Monterey School, and it would also mean that that we would have to join the Southern Berkshire Regional School District. And Bruce Pearson, the dentist, was the moderator for Sheffield, and he joined with people in Monterey, and we wanted to have the people who were on the school board in Sheffield come and be part of our discussion. And we had it in Great Barrington on neutral grounds, purposefully. And they were invited to come to the first meeting, and they didn't show up. They weren't even going to come. Well, they got a blast from the newspaper, our little newspaper in Great Barrington. So the next time they came, but they sat like the monkeys with their arms crossed and not saying a word. They were not going to have anything to do with it. And Bruce, who was their moderator, tried to get them to answer some questions or to participate in the discussion. They absolutely refused. So they were, and as far as I'm concerned, have always been very negative about having us join them. And I think they still are. They would just like to get rid of the Monterey school. And of course, you know, that little building is not in the greatest shape. But if you go there and you see what the teacher who is there, and we've been very fortunate in the teachers that were there. You know, we've had some wonderful people and some wonderful people in the last couple of years. You know, their activities, you can see what they're doing. You can see how the kids are enthusiastic. You can see how the kids are free in many ways to say what they feel and to be part of the school is theirs, you know. And as I say, we've been very, very fortunate in that. And when you lose that, you know, you really do. You'll have a class with 25 kids, or pretty close to it. And the largest class I ever had at that school was 19. And even that was only a half a day. That's when they decided to send half of the kids to New Marlboro right in the middle of a school day, you know, unbeknownst to the teacher that they were doing it. And of course, one of the secrets of the one-room schoolhouse was the fact they frequently would forget to tell us that there was a meeting. And so we never got the messages to do this or that or the other thing, because they had forgotten to see that we were going to be a day behind them. They've already had it, and they tell us about it. That was a blessing. Don't tell anybody I said so. But yes, it was wonderful. So we did very well on those things.
Yeah. So
My time on the select board was, I worked with Judy, who was our secretary. Very wonderful, bright woman, you know, just terrific. I believe her job was an editor at Time magazine, and she worked, you know, maybe 3 evenings or 4 evenings a week, and then she came and worked for us. But she was wonderful, and she and I would be there till 11 o'clock at night doing things and so forth and so on. It was just great to work with her. And when we did all these kinds of things together, we kind of smoothed things out and got things done, and they all worked very well. I don't remember anything as major as the school decision. And as I say, every year they would come by, Mary Ellen Brown and Tom Consolati, and said, you know, we would really like to close the school. Would you be willing to vote that? And of course, fortunately, the answer from the 3 of us, no matter who they were, was yes, no, we do not want to close the school. It's very important. It's still very important. I don't know how they're going to get away from it, but, you know, at one time, it was possible that they would take over the land that was given by Edith Wilson to put the school up there and still have it be part of the center of town. And we do have one of the best center of town in the Berkshires, as far as I'm concerned. You know, we have everything right there: the church, the school, the store, the library, the post office, all right there. And not many of the other towns do. If you take a look at Marlboro, it has segments where you get one or the other of one of those municipal buildings and services, but not the whole thing right there.
well, you just talked about the Edith Wilson House. You just spoke about the Edith Wilson House.
About Orchard House?
About Edith Wilson.
Oh,
How about talking about when you met Edith and how you got involved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, talk about Edith in the house, and that would be great.
Yeah. I loved Edith. She did so many wonderful things, and was just terrific. Straight-laced lady, no nonsense, but just wonderful. And she came to me one day when I was at the Monterey school while I was on the board, and she said, "What do you think would happen if I decided to give my property to the town?" And I said, "Oh, I think they'd be thrilled, to have you do that." And she said, "Well," she said, "that's what I would like to do." And that included Marjorie's house right next to it, not just Edith's house, but Marjorie's too. So we put it on the warrant, and yes, there was some discussion about it, because of course that meant that we would lose taxes on those two pieces of property, whatever. But the town voted to take her two pieces of property, and that the tax part of it was not going to be anything that would really be difficult for us to swallow, because we would have the opportunity to decide what to do with it. And there were many things that were suggested. At one time, Michelle Miller came up with some wonderful suggestions and had some actual designs to, include perhaps a new police department in the building, more municipal services provided in the building, and so forth. That somehow or other didn't fly. I don't know why, but it was a nice job that she did in presentation. We had another presentation. We just couldn't seem to get that building off the ground to make use of it. And it would have been necessary, because the people who played cards could be there. It would be a center, but it just never got off the ground. So I don't know why, and I don't know why we couldn't do that. And then when Joe Baker came along, one of the things that he was able to provide us with was the expertise to make it a non-taxable donation. And that was a lot of paperwork on his part and so forth. And we should be grateful to him for that, that was wonderful. And then we tried to do other things, and we just couldn't seem to get it going, and I don't really know. And as I say, we had Cynthia Weber and Shirley Oles and Evelyn Valianos, and those are the ones that I remember just right off my hand. But we met constantly and tried to get those things done. And as I say, Joe did the very best that he could. And then finally, somehow or other, it worked.
Yeah.
And
We're almost there.
Yeah. And so I'm hoping that it becomes a big success. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Right on that one.
And did you want to talk a little bit about your social life in Monterey? Like whether there were, potluck dinners, quilting bees, what your social life was like? Not that you had any time, but...
The quilting group. I was not part of the first quilting group, which Barbara Tryon was, and the first thing that they did was the flag. The center of town. What will I say? The one that they all did. The one, Edith Wilson did the masthead for the Monterey News, and then this was like a takeoff on the Monterey News, and the one that won the competition for choosing the center medallion that would be the center of town, and that was done through Jan Emmons, Barbara, Sally Pullen, and, you know, all the people that put them, I want to say Mary Jane, it isn't, Mary Kate, you know, super duper seamstress, let me tell you. And all those people who did that one, and they didn't, and after they had done that, they kind of got together and said, we'll have a quilting group. And I'm sure Barbara can tell you more about that than I did, but we had, after that, we would have meetings like at least once a month, maybe every 2 weeks. And Barbara Tryon would always make the most wonderful desserts for our little meeting. So if you weren't going to go, you were going to miss something. So, but she was just wonderful. And she's still doing that today, you know. But everybody becomes quite busy and so forth. But, you know, it was really wonderful. It was a close group to do that, you know. And then, of course, in the middle of all this was Alice Summers and Art Summers, who was so absolutely wonderful to the town and so forth. And at one time, they decided to make the house a house of celebration. And two of my daughters had their receptions at that. You know, they were married in the little church up on,
Beartown.
yeah. And then they would have the reception at Allison. And as I say, Suzanne's reception was there, and Joan's reception was there. So just great. And
We miss them.
they were, and of course Alice started a yoga thing at one time. And you had the yoga on her lawn in the summer, you know, just wonderful. You know, all those marvelous people who contributed to the town. And when I first came, and there were probably the town only had about 500 permanent residents, and when I first came for that, we had summer people, and they were not given any particular standing in the town. And if I remember correctly, when I was on the board, that we got it so that they were not summer people, but second homeowners, giving them more stature, and that we had meetings for them once a year at least, so that they could voice whatever they thought needed to be done, wanted to be done, felt it was deserved, and so forth, and we would listen to them and so forth. So they did have more of a standing, and they were pretty wonderful people, you know. Fred Lankham, for instance, had a lot of that, but of course he was permanent. He had come over to be part of Gould Farm and then opened the restaurant on Route 123. And he had connections to the ballet, and he had connections to Shakespeare. And I'm telling you that when you had the ballet come to perform, and the men in pink tights, and you had kids sitting around Green Park on the periphery like an amphitheater, I think they never in their life saw a guy in pink tights, you know. But it was a wonderful expanding experience for them, you know, just great. So just all those particular wonderful things.
Yeah.
And then there were the Nichols who lived down on across from Turkey Bush Farm, and he had particularly strong input and so forth to the ballet also, and we would have some of their performances. There was a lot of reaching out from the townspeople and so forth. And of course, right across from them, the Turkey Bush, we had Joyce and Lou Sheffy, who were most generous to the town, and with their wonderful donations and all those kinds of things. And speaking of donations, we had the fire department. And that was something very special. And I truthfully credit Ray Tryon with starting that. Not only from the little tiny firehouse that was at the top of New Marlborough Road there, but the building that we have now, and the upkeep of that, and the involvement of the young men who were in town. And in a little town, you don't have a lot of things that young men can do. And he involved them into being part of a volunteer fire department. And I think that was wonderful for them to have that opportunity, and of course it's still going on today. And then of course at one time, when we took a look at the fact that Chiriam had this nice outdoor pavilion, and we said, why can't Monterey have one too? And I think Ray made that possible also. I know that Lou Sheffy was involved with the building of the first firehouse, the big one. And then afterwards, I don't know who was involved, but I know that it seemed to be under the aegis of Ray Tryon for that.
Yeah.
You know, that was wonderful. And then of course, Green Park is there, and of course that was the Green Park at the gift to the town, you know,
From,
from the Greens. Yes.
Oh.
But why can't I remember his first name? But here's a story to go with the Green. My house in Monterey was on the market for 6 years, and it was monitored to keep it in good shape by Mrs. Green. And she would go in, you know, like once a week and keep it in good shape, and she did that for 6 years. And when it came time and we moved in, and we wanted to, we didn't know anything about the school, we didn't know anything about the taxes, we didn't know anything about anything. But we just knew that that house was in the middle of a swamp in Florida we would have bought. It was perfect. And so when we needed to finally find a school, because we did have to send the kids to school, I gave them a month off, probably, but it was a gift. Anyway, when we finally needed to find, we couldn't find the school. They, as I pointed out, that the older girls all had to go to the Marlborough school. And we couldn't find it. And so we finally hired her, and I said, I don't want you to babysit, and she had babysat for us a couple of times. I said, I don't want you to babysit, I want you to find out, show us where the school is. We have no idea. So it turns out that when you go into New Marlborough and into Hartsville and so forth, and if you don't raise your eyes up, you won't see the school. It's on another level. So we had driven by it several times, and finally she said, you have to look up. It's up there. And that's how we found it. But we would never have found it if she hadn't shown it to us. We've been by it a couple of times, you know, whatever. So, you know, there were a lot of little wonderful things. And as I say, everybody was pretty wonderful. And I was grateful for the school, grateful for the town, grateful for having been able to possibly live here. You couldn't have found a better place to raise kids.
right.
You absolutely.
So, what's it like for you coming back here now that your house is now part of Gould Farm? What does that feel like? And now
Yeah.
you're back. This is about the third time you're back since your house was turned over to Gould
I
Farm.
didn't tell you very much about Orchard House.
No.
Let us do Orchard House.
Okay.
No. Let's see.
So how did
Donna Burkhart was the one who put my name up to be on the board. And she did that like maybe the late 80s and so forth. And I was thrilled to be asked, and so what they had been my neighbors for so long. And they were all pretty wonderful. When we moved in, um, there was a couple who were at Gould Farm, and they came to welcome us on the first day of our moving in. And they brought a great big green squash and said how wonderful it was and whatever. However, they said, we're going to turn off your water. You won't have any water. And my husband was away. I have 6 kids, and the littlest one is really a teeny tiny kid. And they're telling us they're going to cut our water off, and how can you do that? So I called my lawyer, and he said, oh, they can't do that. They're supposed to, it's part of the deed. Well, it turns out that maybe the water was at the corner of Curtis Road and Gould Road, and they were not going to use that well anymore. So if you went to court, I don't know what would have been the decision of that. So we were horrified. And finally, whoever was in charge was just leaving as director of Gould Farm, and he didn't assume any responsibility. But then Price came.
Alan Price? No.
No. I'll think of it anyway. Mr. Price took over, and he came down and said, don't worry about it. We'll somehow or other get water to you, and you don't have to worry. Whenever you get ready, we'll help to pay half of the cost of your putting in a well. So that helped, but it still meant that we were dependent on them for tanks of water. We got water from the lake at Gould Farm, at the lake at Lake Garfield, right where the little store was at the corner. That was the one that was bought by Dean Amadon. And we've got water there and water on the road to Lee when they had the freezing. We were really in some tough strait. So we finally got our own well in. And the couple who had been at Gould Farm, who told us this, they said that they were planning to buy the house. On that, they said they'd been waiting and they were going to buy it. And I was so horrified, I called Mrs. Taft, who owned the house, and who was a wonderful, lovely, lovely lady. And I called her and she said, oh, don't be silly. She said, they were going to buy it every single year and they say that. She said, they're not going to buy it. You don't have to feel bad. But we're a little bit in straits for that one winter, let me tell you. Yeah, so the part of that is so strange, and probably 15, 20 years later, Hampton Price came to us and said that he had been going through his papers, he was retiring from Gould Farm, and he came across the fact that he had said to us that he would pay half of the amount of money that we put in to build it, putting in a well. And we never talked to him about that, we never said anything. So he wanted to know how much, and he was going to pay it. And of course, I said, oh, lady Godiva here, you don't have to. My husband gave me the elbow. I said, no, we'd be happy to take the money. So I think it was probably like maybe $400 or something. But nevertheless, that was all those years later, Hampton Price, who was just wonderful. I mean, he was so wonderfully upright and kind and good and all those things. But he was just so wonderful. But and this was years later.
Wow.
I remember the elbow and the ribs. So, but that was, wonderful to have that happen. But Gould Farm has always been a wonderful neighbor. And then they decided that they needed to have another house to house guests. And they formed a committee, and I was chair of that committee. And we had Donna, we had Kingsley Kelly and Sally, we had, a whole group of wonderful people that were on the committee. And we originally thought we were going to be putting the house at the corner of Gould Farm, or Gould Road, and the road that goes into Yeah, right, where the old swimming hole used to be. And that seemed not to be a suitable site, and we hired Harrison, the architect, and worked with him, and he was wonderful to work with. We worked with the design, and we found this to be the best kind of site. And of course, the big thing that fiddling with this piece of property was the fact that that was where the orchard was, and meant you had to take part of the orchard in order to put the house in. And that worked out. We were able to do that. And there's still part of the orchard in back there. So, but we had great parts for this house. The house was up structurally. Donna was very strong in her desire to have it put up with as quickly as possible so it wouldn't be a disturbance to the residents and so forth. So the house was pretty structurally done. And as I say, that was the beginning of the hunting season. And some of the guys who evidently were supposed to close up the house didn't do a very good job, and we had a terrible storm. And the storm ruined the open house, and everything, the heating, the plumbing, everything had to be redone. And it was Kate Tower, who was the director of Gould Farm at that time, and she fought with the insurance companies to pay for it, and there were a couple of them, you know, and we managed to get it, and it is a wonderful addition and well done, you know, beautiful.
Do you have to go to lunch?
Yeah,
What time is lunch?
around 12 o'clock.
Which is
But
now.
But I, you know, we can finish this up, whatever.
Well, my next question is, do you have any plans on coming back soon?
No, I don't, right
Okay.
at the moment.
Okay.
I'm really surprised at this one, if it wasn't for the church celebration,
Right.
I wouldn't be coming back, but that just happened to be an opportune kind of thing. And my daughter was free enough to drive me here on Friday, and she's going back on Sunday, and then Dottie Callahan from Sheffield, who works at Greylock, is going to, she and Dave are going to take me back on Tuesday.
Okay,
So that works.
okay. So let me think about it. There's always the possibility that we can do a road trip. I could think about it. You're definitely not gonna come back for Christmas again this year.
No, last year for Christmas, we hired a house in Lee.
Yeah,
It was just absolutely fabulous, couldn't have been more wonderful.
right,
Yeah, and they're unfortunately gonna sell the house and they're not gonna rent it, you
okay.
know. But
Okay.
it was just terrific.
Well, if you're not planning to come back, maybe what I might do is make a road trip to Rhode Island and come visit you in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Because I'll have some more questions, and depending on how she feels, I would love to bring Shirley Olds with me.
Oh, sure,
She's so much fun, but I don't know if she would leave stores.
really.
Yeah, things are.
Why? He's not well?
She says he's forgetting things,
Oh,
but, you know,
well, he doesn't have to remember anything, he's gonna be in the car. Whatever.
I know, so we'll figure it out. So I
Yeah.
think we'll let you go to lunch now.
Okay.
I'm gonna turn this off.